The phrase, "and then it got worse," does occur a few times on this channel, but in this particular case, the phrase applied more to the enemies who found themselves in the sights of this particular vessel as it progressed through its career. USS Barb was one of many Gato-class fleet submarines. Laid down before the US entry into World War II in June 1941, she was launched in April 1942 and commissioned 3 months later in July. She would spend the remainder of summer on working up exercises before being assigned to Submarine Squadron 50 and dispatched in October to what was a relatively rare posting for a modern US sub in World War II, the European theatre. This was to be something of a baptism by fire. Operation Torch was about to launch and the new sub was sent on a mission which her relatively large size perhaps initially suggested she wasn't best suited for: close-in shore recon of enemy positions. This would include sending in a landing party, which would then itself guide Allied ships on final approach, whilst the sub also acted as a beacon further out to sea. Once the main landing efforts had been successful, she would also have to actively patrol the area in case any Vichy French ships decided to try and escape. 4 more patrols after this would follow, all in the Atlantic coastal and North Sea coastal areas, but she found nothing much to shoot at except the occasional enemy mine. Something that was quite common to Allied submarines in this period and in this area, since what little Axis shipping had been around in the first half of the war had mostly already been violently curtailed. By spring of 1943, the submarine squadron was therefore reallocated to the Pacific, and between crossing 2 oceans, a refit while she was in the US, and Pacific Theatre-specific training, she wouldn't undertake her first frontline operation in the Pacific until October. But this would also net the submarine her first score. An initial attack on a lone vessel and 2 escorts was thwarted by bad weather. 3 days later, a small convoy appeared, but this was escorted by aircraft, forcing the sub to stay submerged. 3 days after that, high speed and competent evasion by yet another convoy further frustrated Barb. But at last, she managed to send something to the bottom when a convoy of 4 Japanese ships and a matching number of escorts almost ran her over in a squall. She spotted them first thanks to her radar and hit 2 ships with 3 out of 4 torpedoes, but then had to dive to evade the escorts. Her next patrol netted a single ship sunk and some installations blown up by shore bombardment using a 3-inch deck gun, but her luck changed quite significantly in May 1944 when Commander Eugene Fluckey took command, and her 8th patrol netted 5 ships and 2 smaller vessels totaling just under 15,500 tons in an action-packed adventure that included chasing down trawlers on the surface through an ice field, sinking a target whilst under air attack herself, and making her last 2 torpedoes count with a double hit on one final target, which left her with nothing to do but evade when the escorts came calling. Her next patrol saw her assigned to a small wolf pack alongside Queenfish and Tunny. This group teamed up with another wolf pack to launch a coordinated strike on a major enemy convoy. The escort's counterattack managed to damage Barb, but a number of ships from the convoy were sunk, and still more of them were hit and damaged. Barb's particular contribution in this case, however, was temporarily hampered by a seabird which chose to perch on the periscope every time it was raised, with its tail feathers obscuring the lens. They eventually raised both periscopes, which meant that one of them was accessible. In mid-September, along with Queenfish, Barb was heading for the site of a recently sunk Japanese ship, which was reported to have been transporting Allied prisoners of war. Along the way, they ran into a larger convoy, and after realising just how valuable it was, Barb managed to position herself such that a single 6-torpedo salvo covered both the escort carrier Unyo and the large tanker Azusa, which were both then sunk in the same strike. The next day, the sub managed to rescue just over a dozen Allied prisoners of war from the water, which of course was the original objective of that particular mission. Often in company with Queenfish, Barb would continue to rack up successes over the next few months, including an attack during her 11th patrol in December 1944 when Barb, Queenfish and Pakuda wiped out an entire large convoy over the course of 2 days of consistent attacks. A sudden absence of enemy ships in the aftermath led Fluckey guessing correctly that the enemy convoys were now so scared of them that they were proceeding along the coast and then anchoring in shallow harbours protected by mines at night. Having tracked a couple of ships, he found one such refuge with 30 vessels hiding in it. Unloading all 10 of his submarine's torpedo tubes, he managed to sink 3 ships and damage 3 others before making a run for it for the open ocean, using the smoke of burning ships to obscure the high-speed dash on the surface that he had to make through the uncharted and mine-infested waters. That particular patrol understandably netted Barb a Presidential Unit Citation, and Flucky got a Medal of Honor. She headed back for the US West Coast, where she was refitted, and Flucky insisted on supplementing his 3-inch deck gun with a 5-inch rocket launcher aft, and the sub was back on patrol in late June 1945, now operating off of the Japanese home islands. This yielded mostly smaller coastal craft, which was pretty much all the Japanese had left at this stage, and so Barb supplemented this meagre tally with bombardments of various ports and other shore installations, the rocket launcher coming in very handy for this, and Barb thus becoming the first submarine to hit enemy targets with rocket fire. By mid-July, she'd run out of torpedoes, but Flucky decided, well, still got other ammunition, so he hung around. Finding a railway running near the coast, he sent ashore a landing party with explosives, who, after some Benny Hill-style hijinks, including falling into several ditches, managed to blow up one of the trains running along said tracks, which was something of an unusual kill for a submarine. After an attack on the town of Shiritori, which left them out of 3-inch ammunition and out of rockets, Barb moved on to the town of Sibatoro, setting buildings and small ships on fire with the 20mm and 40mm anti-aircraft guns, expending her very last rounds of ammunition on a trawler. With nothing left but small arms aboard Barb, the trawler was still annoyingly afloat, and so she rammed it to ensure that it sank. Finally heading back to Midway to reload, she was in the middle of doing so when news of the Japanese surrender arrived. She thus finished the war with around 100,000 tons of shipping sunk. The exact figure depends on which source you ask. After sailing back to the USA, Barb was decommissioned until 1951, after which she was reactivated, refitted, and then given a guppy modernisation. But she only spent a few months back on active duty with the US Navy before being sold on to the Italian Navy, who renamed her Enrico Tazzoli and operated her until 1972. She was eventually scrapped in 1975, although the now Admiral Flucky would later write that if he and her World War II crew had known about this at the time, they would have brought her back from the Italians to become a museum ship. The name, however, would continue on in a Cold War-era nuclear attack sub, and will be brought back again when USS Barb SSN 804 is laid down, which is supposed to happen at some point later this year.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.